So now I am very excited to welcome Sofia Samatar, Kyoko Mori, and Christopher Kondrich celebrating the release of Creature Needs, Writers Respond to the Science of Animal Conservation. As many of you probably saw, tonight's event for Creature Needs was supposed to be hosted by Ross Anderson, journalist and staff writer here at The Atlantic, but unfortunately, Ross had to travel unexpectedly to South Korea to report on the political situation there. So instead, Sofia Samatar and Kyoko Mori will be introduced, and afterwards in conversation with Christopher Kondrich, who is co-editor of Creature Needs, along with Susan Tassin and Lucy Spellman. In addition to being co-editor of Creature Needs, Kondrich is the poet-in-residence of Creature Conserve, a nonprofit dedicated to growing a creative community that combines art and science to cultivate new pathways for wildlife conservation. The organization brings artists, writers, scientists, traditional knowledge holders, and other experts together to learn about threats to wildlife, exchange ideas, and find opportunities for growth at the intersection of art, science, and conservation. Kondrich is the author of the forthcoming poetry collection, Tread Upon, which will be published by Copper Canyon Press in 2026, as well as Valuing, which won the National Poetry Series and was published by the University of Georgia Press. His poetry and essays appear widely in such magazines as the New York Review of Books, The Believer, the Paris Review, the Yale Review, the Kenyon Review, Plowshares, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. A McDowell Fellow and an associate editor for the literary magazine 32 Poems, he teaches in the MFA program in creative and environmental writing at Eastern Oregon University. So please join me in welcoming our panelists tonight.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. Thank you so much to Politics and Prose for hosting us. I want to thank Ross Anderson, even though he couldn't be here, for being willing to have this conversation with us this evening. I want to thank the University of Minnesota Press for putting out this incredible book, Creature Needs. I'm so happy to have been working with them. I want to thank the 39 contributors to Creature Needs and to the remarkable contributors that join us this evening, who I will be introducing after I say just a few words about the book. I just want to say that, Creature Needs is a special book. It's the first of its kind. It publishes new literary works by some of America's most prominent and exciting poets and authors, alongside excerpts from the science articles that inspired them. Each contributor was assigned an American animal species whose population is threatened or endangered, and provided with a recent journal article that addresses the problems facing their assigned species and the solutions that require more public engagement and support. So the intent behind the book was that the resulting works would make the problems facing these animals today not only more real, but also more understandable, meaningful, and solvable. The book is organized into 6 sections, representing the 6 things all creatures need to survive. So that's air, food, water, shelter, room to move, and each other. The structure is significant because it demonstrates how each of these basic needs are interconnected and under assault, and how the needs of other species are being ignored in favor of our own. The only good thing about the dire circumstances that animals are facing is that human beings have the power, if we choose to ration and protect these resources. And my hope is that Creature Needs reveals what's at stake if we choose not to ration and protect the resources that every species needs to survive, and what will happen if the warnings that science continues to give us remains unheeded. The book includes illustrations by Franco Zacca, and each section is introduced by Lucy Spellman, one of the co-editors and founder of Creature Conserve, the nonprofit out of which the book emerged. And as I've mentioned, the book includes 39 contributors, from award-winning poets like Craig Santos Paris and Danica Kelly, fiction luminaries like Charles Baxter and Amy Bender, and our 2 remarkable contributors who join us here tonight. So let me just say a little bit about the two of them. First, we will hear from Kyoko Mori. Mori is a nonfiction writer whose most recent book, Cat and Bird, is described as a memoir in animals. I adore that description. About the book, Kirkus wrote, quote, "As she moves among stories of her cats, jobs, and elements of her past, Mori explores how, in the company of only animals and oneself, one can come to understand many different things that may elude comprehension in larger social settings." Mori is also the author of the novels Shizuku's Daughter, One Bird, Stonefield True Arrow, and Barn Cat. Her essays and stories have been published in the Best American Essays, the American Scholar, and Conjunctions. Mori will read her essay, Ancient Music, which was written in response to the article Spawning Intervals, Timing, and Riverine Habitat Use of Adult Atlantic Sturgeon in the Hudson River, which was published in the journal Transactions of the American Fisheries Society. And then after that, we will hear from Sofia Samatar. Samatar is a writer of fiction and nonfiction whose most recent books include Opacities, a book about writing, publishing, and friendship. The White Mosque, a memoir which was a finalist for the Penn Gene Stein Award, and the novella The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain, which was a New York Times notable book, named a Best Book of the Year by Slate and Esquire, among other publications, and was recently named a finalist for the Philip K. Dick Award for Science Fiction. About her book, The Washington Post wrote, quote, "The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain brilliantly explores how the mechanisms of shared oppression can furnish shared liberation." And Samatar will be reading from her piece, The Sublime is a Foreign Species, which was written in response to, the journal article is called A Systemic Review of Potential Habitat Suitability for the Jaguar Panther Onca in Central Arizona and New Mexico, published in the scientific journal Oryx. Let us welcome first Kyoko Mori and then Sofia Samatar.
Thank you for coming. And I want to thank Chris for editing this book and for all of you for coming and also Politics and Prose at the Wharf for hosting this event. So I had never written about fish before. So, some of my essay is really about like the surprise of finding out about fish. However, I find it just so fitting that we are having this reading, at this location. Because the thing I know about the location is like there are these fish fry or fish, restaurants right on the wharf. And I only know this because I know this neighborhood as being on the way to the dreaded vehicle inspection in DC every 2 years. And I look for those fish places because you really need to veer right toward the fish places. Otherwise, you're going to get on the freeway and totally miss the vehicle inspection. So I like the idea of the fish places, but really my piece is kind of about why I don't eat fish, or at least that is what starts it. All right, I'm gonna move my glasses here. So we're not gonna read the whole piece. We're each gonna read about 5 minutes. And I practiced this with my cats. So I am going to read the first 3 paragraphs and then the last. Mine is called Ancient Music. Of all the animals who share our planet, fish are the hardest to know and love as companions. The wild species spend their lives underwater. Their daily habits, seasonal migrations, and life cycles hidden from us. The tropical fish in our home aquarium seem more ornamental than companionable. The glitter of neon tetras, the swirl of angelfish, the fragile delicacy of glass catfish, so pretty in a desultory, distant way. Except for the fleeting seconds they rise to the surface to interact, more with the food we sprinkle than with us, they are hardly distinguishable from pebbles from the pebbles, artificial seaweed, and plastic castles that decorate their make-believe world under the sea. Although most fish in aquariums are bred in captivity, they are fundamentally different from the cats, dogs, rabbits, hamsters, parakeets, geckos, or even hermit crabs and tarantulas we keep as pets. We cannot touch them. We do not breathe the same element. What gives them life will kill them. What gives us life will kill them after a short exposure. What sustains them will drown the best swimmers among us after a few hours at sea without intervention, or stop our hearts immediately with hypothermia. When people give up eating meat, they usually start by omitting mammals, cows, pigs, from their diet, and soon after, chickens and turkeys. Fish are the last to come off the plate. This may be because all our lives we've been told the benefits of fish consumption, lowering cholesterol, brain food, and so on. But it's also because, for most humans, turning cows and pigs into food is uncomfortably close to devouring our dogs and cats. The situation is further complicated by the few mammals, such as rabbits and horses, that are eaten by some and cared for by others. Tucking into a fillet of salmon or a whole trout arrayed on a platter does not cause the same level of discomfort for most diners. My own journey to becoming a vegetarian was different because I grew up in Japan, where any 4-year-old accompanying her mother to the market would find herself eye level with a slab of ice on a wooden platform, and spread across the slick expanse, a dozen fish laid out in profile, their dead eyes wide open. I didn't give up eating fish, I never started. Although I always balked at the idea of eating anything that had to be killed, I was 26 before I stopped consuming any fellow creature on our planet, not even to be polite to the chef. The Atlantic sturgeon, whose migration into the Hudson River was the subject of a scientific study between 2010 and 2016, is currently listed as an endangered species due to the habitat loss and to centuries of overfishing for its eggs, a source of caviar. A living fossil that has existed for some 250 million years. The sturgeon, whose body is armored with 5 rows of bony plates known as scutes, indeed looks prehistoric. It has a long snout, 5 barbels like a scraggly beard under the chin, and a lopsided tail. Some individuals can live 60 years and grow to be 14 feet long and weigh 800 pounds. Although most sturgeons in the South Atlantic are thought to live only 25 to 30 years, they do not reach their maturity until they are about 11 years old. The 391 caught off the coast of Delaware for the Hudson River study were between 40 centimeters and 236 centimeters, just 7.74 feet. And only those longer than 130 centimeters, likely to be full-grown adults and ready to spawn, were tagged for tracking. If you watch the YouTube videos of the capture and the tagging, the fish held in the net alongside of the boat will remind you of certain breeds of retrievers. Aerodynamic, spotted, temporarily calm, the whole species will strike you suddenly as not so alien. I'm gonna read the end. So they tag the fish with telemetry tags so that every time the fish swam up and down the river, it kind of rang, this bell that you couldn't hear like above water. So at the end, when I say I listen for it, I mean it metaphorically. But the study had graphs of what these, like the graphs for like how the telemetry worked. And it looked like musical notes from the Middle Ages for like Gregorian chants. not the musical notes that we, read if you study piano, but, from before. So I also realized that the stretch of Hudson, where the study occurred, at least the first part of it, is really familiar to me. So this is the last paragraph. A small segment of the study area is on my migration route. Although I've never lived in New York, it's a city I visit regularly, and the path over and along the Hudson River between the Upper West Side and the West 30s is where I run. South through the Riverside Park from 108th Street to the Dog Run, down the footpath on 72nd Street to the waterfront, along the running cycling path to the Hudson Yards. It's a point-to-point route. Downstream first, turning around at the Javits Center and heading back upstream. On every run, I'm aware of the strata of sound that surround me. The planes in the sky, the birds in the trees, the cars on the road, construction and delivery vehicles on the docks, the runners and cyclists on the path, and the water flowing down the river and sloshing against the embankment. I haven't returned to the Hudson since encountering the study, but if my next run happens between May and July, I'll listen for the bass notes of the sturgeon in the river below, a strain of ancient music. Their migration anchors the world we move through, breathing air, water, air, water. Thank you.
Thanks, that was great. Okay, thank you. Kyoko, that was wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I add my thanks also to Politics and Prose and to Chris for making this thing happen, which for me has been such a pleasure to read the whole anthology. So my piece is called "The Sublime is a Foreign Species," and it is about jaguar. And so I was sent, a scientific article about jaguars to read, and that article comes with a number of keywords. And so when I wrote my piece, I used the same keywords. So the piece is broken into sections, and those keywords are ecological restoration, historical range, jaguar, Panthera onca, rewilding, spatial model, species distribution model, and USA. So I'm going to read you the section that is called Jaguar. King of the animals, largest felid in the Americas, devourer of giants, adorns the names of rulers, scroll jaguar, bird jaguar, moon jaguar. Hair short and bristly, ears small, rounded, and black, with white or biscuit-colored central spots. Hunts at dawn and dusk, belongs to darkness and the night sky, its pelt a star chart. Pale at the throat, on the belly, inside the limbs. Bringer of rain, swims with head and spine above the water. Depicted with clouds, shells, aquatic plants, and sometimes scales like a fish. Pupil round, iris golden or reddish, tongue flat at the tip and covered with sharpened papillae. Animal form of the Lord of the Smoking Mirror, manifesting at the close of a cosmic cycle. Fond of catnip, represented with a vessel of water, a symbol of the moon. Skull robust, broad, and relatively short. Skull, excavated from the Templo Mayor, holds a jade ball in its mouth. When emerging from the water, shakes the body and each paw separately. Kills by ambush. Eats in a crouching position with its paws on the kill. Bears 1 to 4 young at a time, usually 2. Vocalizes an atonal, pulsing, low-intensity cough or grunt, sometimes described as a hoarse bark or roar. rakes the trees with its claws, arouses thunder, rarely attacks humans unless provoked. Most commonly found near water and plant cover, but tolerates a variety of habitats, including rainforest, savanna, marshland, and desert. Eats more than 85 prey species, eats grass and avocados, causes eclipses. When cooked and eaten, bestows the power to hypnotize enemies. Heart of the mountain, god of the underworld, companion of shamans, shelters in caves, appears in murals as a plumed cat covered with feathers, carries a blood scroll in its mouth, will descend to earth in divine form at the end of days, population decreasing, born with its eyes closed. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for that beautiful reading. I think maybe where we could start is just sort of where the two of you started as writers. So, the three editors, Susan Tace and Lucy Spellman and I, we approached writers whose work we loved, and writers who was those who were writing in similar sort of environmental spaces, but not everyone was writing very sort of directly into that space. We just approached writers whose work we admired. So when we approached Kyoko and Sofia, we asked if they were interested in being a part of this project. So they knew what was coming, right? And what was coming was a scientific article from an open sourced, it was an open sourced article. So my question to you is, what was your reaction to receiving and beginning to sort of comb through the scientific research and text, sort of doing that as a writer, and sort of what was the process like for you to sort of translate that and sort of filter that into your own creative process?
Yeah, thank you. I was really excited when I got the invitation to write something for the book, partly because I've just never done anything exactly like this before. I thought it was a wonderful cause, but I also thought it was a really interesting invitation in an artistic sense. I'm very interested in just the kind of distribution of knowledge and the widening of knowledge for as many people as possible. And there's so much incredible material that is in these scientific articles, but it is geared toward experts, and it's for most people, even though it's open source, right? It's not that you couldn't go read it, but in most cases, there are some barriers that are there for people to encounter that material. And so I was very excited at the prospect of, making that kind of bridge and digging into the scientific text myself, and to figure out how am I going to sort of play with it. And as I said, the first thing I decided was, well, I'm definitely going to use one of the genre markers of the scientific article, which is those keywords. And I thought that's a great kind of, way of getting inspiration to structure the piece.
Yeah, I too was really excited to be part of this, because I like the idea of being in conversation with, a piece of writing that is so different from what I'm used to reading. At the same time, I did kind of have trepidations about this, because, I got D's in science through school. I wasn't like an overachiever who was good at everything. I got like A's in a few things and like really terrible grades in everything else. I was a kid, and science just never like my strength. However, I have been a bird watcher for a long time. And so I read about birds, but even then, just kind of general reader, general interest books. However, I have a friend whose husband works at the national, it's one of the national organizations for health. he's a scientist, and he knows that I'm interested in birds because we both watch hummingbirds. So he'll often send me articles that are scientific articles. And I think he really thinks I will understand every word, and I don't. I kind of get the gist of it, okay? But because of this, I was kind of used to this. But at the same time, and then also the editors were nice enough to tell me that if I really couldn't work with the article that I received, I could ask for another. So I thought, God, I hope I understand this one. And then I get it, and it's about fish. I'm thinking, but no, I know nothing about fish. But then I thought that Elizabeth Bishop, wrote about fish. I mean, there's this incredible poem called The Fish, where the speaker, catches this huge fish and lets it go. Another poem of hers that I love is called At the Fish Houses. And it's about the cold water or the scales. I thought, okay, maybe I too can write about fish. I mean, not as brilliantly as Elizabeth Bishop, but nonetheless. So, and I read the article, and I was relieved to understand the gist of it. What was going on, the tagging. And here too, because I've watched nature shows, so I know that they tag birds. And of course it's different with birds, but I understood the concept of it. So I thought, okay. And then it was the Hudson, where I've run for decades. And I thought, oh yeah, the fish are going up and down where I go running. And I feel like, okay, I can write about this. So I was very happy.
So yeah, we didn't ask you, what animal would you like to write about, right? We just kind of sent them an article and said, okay, if this doesn't really work, we can send you a second one, right? You each got a mulligan, right? But the thing is, I wonder whether or not you felt ultimately connected to the animals that you were writing about, and how, whether you felt connected through the process of writing your piece, whether you felt connected to these species through reading the science, or was it more of you felt sort of in touch with your own sense of animality? That's something that's been kind of on my mind as I've been revisiting this, the collection, that there are just so many different ways to feeling one's own sense of being an animal, right? And I mean, unfortunately, with this book, precarity is this sort of recurrent theme. But yeah, I guess I wanted to hear from you about your connection to these species or to animality.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the idea of migration. I go to New York periodically, and if I stay overnight, usually my friends live on the Upper West Side, so I always run there. So I feel like I too am kind of migrating through this area. I also, notice how the environment changes. Well, for runners, on the Upper West Side, it's been a real improvement. In the 80s when I used to run there, I had to be very careful. Where am I going to come up, into the city? Because there were some areas where I didn't really want to be alone. Now you can run that whole stretch and even go north, and it's just all gentrified. But that's problematic too. So this idea that you're migrating through spaces and the space changes. I mean, this is how it is. And I knew this about birds, how their migrations are threatened because, the landscape changes. And of course, I read this and understand that same, with fish, dams, human activity, overfishing, all the things that humans do, they kind of lead to this kind of degradation of the environment. And the more they have to move, the more sort of dangerous places they have to go to. So in that way, I understood. And also, these are kind of huge fish. And they did kind of remind me of dogs. And even though I'm not a dog person, dogs I understand, because people have dogs, And yes, why do we think that mammals are so easy to relate to? And fish or birds, not so easy to relate to. That's just kind of not really well thought of, thought out, in our own kind of assumptions. So, yeah.
The question reminds me of seeing Karen Joy Fowler talk after the release of We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, which, if you haven't read it, is a great novel. And without giving too much away, let's say it's a very pro-animal novel. And somebody asked her in the Q&A, did you write this book, to change people's minds and to change the way that we feel and the way that we interact with animals? And she said, I really don't know that something that I write is going to change somebody else, but it changed me.
Yeah.
And I always thought, I felt that that's a really good way of thinking about writing, what writing does, because there's no guarantee that it changes anybody else's mind, but it definitely changes the writer. So you're changing one person. And for me, in writing my piece, I also did not know anything about jaguars. One of the things that I found that I enjoyed doing as I was writing it was following up on some things that in the scientific article were brief mentions, like a brief or a footnote, a brief mention of, well, we know there were jaguars here at this time because there's this guy who took pictures of this jaguar in 1996 and again a decade later. So I'm like, well, who's that guy? So I'm looking him up and finding pictures of this guy and videos of him talking about his encounter with the jaguar, and that went into my piece. And something striking in the way that when I was, watching him and listening to him speak, was that he was talking about houndsmen, like people who, have dogs, go out with dogs, are houndsmen. And of course, we also have the word cowboy. And I think he may even have described himself as a cowboy. And those are like hybrid human-animal terms. We don't necessarily think of them that way, like think about what a cowboy literally is. It's like you're describing a hybrid creature. And I felt that the piece was, on the subject of animality, it was really, an opportunity to think about some of those things that go unnoticed, but that are even embedded in our language that signal a very close relationship and even identification with other species.
So, would you say that, through your experience, having written something creative based on a scientific article, that this is an experience that you think other writers or even other non-writers should have? Should we be engaging more directly with scientific texts, from...
For me, 100%. But you're also talking to somebody who writes science fiction. And of course, science fiction writers do that all that. That's like their daily bread, right? Science fiction writers are always digging around in but what really with the quirks? And we want to dig in and know and figure it out in order to work with it. And I sometimes think of science fiction as a kind of creative nonfiction in a way, because it very often has some kind of nonfiction element, which is scientific principles that operate in our world. And then it becomes, a speculation and a what if around those things. And every piece of science fiction that I've written I've had a similar experience, not always with animals, sometimes with different kind of, tonal vibrations or a deep dive into what would it be like if you were in a prison on the moon, for example. But those things have also been transformative in a similar way to writing this essay. So I think whether it's whether it's in this kind of creative nonfiction sense or in a science fiction sense, I think it is. I think it's fantastic. Also because many of us didn't do that well in science. So it's time to go and brush up.
I wish so there was a kind of buddy system, where you would be paired up with a scientist, to exchange work in this way. Not like your own work, but if a scientist, who understands how hard it is for us to understand all of it, can pick an article and give it to me, once a month, then I can give them a poem, or a short story or an essay to read, because Nate, the guy who sends me the science article, and I have learned, if nothing else, I learned the format, how the science articles are often written, just kind of structure. So when I saw the fish article, I was not intimidated because I kind of understood the structure of it, and I understand kind of the gist of it. So sometimes though, Nate is, his partner is an English professor, a retired English professor, and sometimes she would point out to him like a poem in the New Yorker, which they, subscribe to, and especially if there's a reference to something Nate already knows, from, and he struggles to read it. Because poetry is hard for a scientist to read in the same way the scientific article is hard for me to read because we don't have the same kind of training. I mean, I wish there was a kind of, because this was great doing the anthology because somebody sent me the article. It's hard for me to kind of make myself, I'll just go and just randomly pick an open source article and read one every month. I should do that, but am I really going to do it, I mean, there should be like a service where somebody just sends you something to read once a week, once a month. Yeah. Read this. Yeah.
Yeah, we would all be so lucky as writers to like receive these sorts of like very innovative and genuinely, generative prompts. So I was hoping to maybe open things up to questions from the audience. I know that there is a mic that's going to go around.
Thank you. Kyoko, I have a question for you, which is about, you said you were small when you saw the fish.
Oh, yeah, I was like 4.
Yeah, so I don't even know if you can articulate it, but I have wondered a lot about this disgust factor. Mm-hmm. Like I hardly eat any other meat, but I happily eat fish. Yeah. And I just never I've always thought of it as really visceral. So I wonder if you've ever thought of it for yourself, like were you just born with the disgust or like where did it come from,
I don't know because, other people in my family ate fish, like my brother, my younger brother, no problem. I mean, I'm sure
Japanese family, you would eat fish.
Yeah, they saw the same, But the thing about fish is that you see it as a whole thing. Okay, like if you're a child going grocery shopping with your mother, you don't necessarily understand that that piece of steak is a cow, but like the market, the slab of ice and the fishing profile, it was the whole thing. And I saw it as like a profile, with the eye and looking like this. I am so not eating that. And even as an adult, I usually try to be polite in restaurants. But after I moved to DC, I was with, some friends of mine, and we went to a restaurant. And the people at the next table, one of them ordered this kind of appetizer that involved an octopus. It was not cut up or anything. It was like the whole thing. It was like size of a hamster. I had to ask my friends, can we change seats so I don't have to look at eating I can't. And I don't know what it is. Like some people are more kind of sensitive to that than others. But yeah, I've always had a kind of huge reaction to eating something that, is like your pet.
And not to plants. You don't think of plants.
Not in the. I mean, I grew basil. I cut it and ate it all summer, and harvested. And they don't try to like run away.
Here's to you.
Thank you. This is very enjoyable. Thank you. I'd like to ask Christopher and the other editor, Susan, who is here, if they're willing to talk about.
Oh, you're
well,
Susan.
I just outed her.
I know. I had no idea,
Because Chris is so nervous that he forgot I was sitting in front of him.
Yes, we talked about a piece.
And this is Heather over here, who's the arts curator at Creature Conserve. And Lucy would be here, but she's in Namibia with 12 RISD students and sending me pictures of dung beetles pushing dung around. The male pushes and the female rides. So I told her that I think the female probably is steering. Because, and she's sending me lioness trying to eat an impala, speaking of fish. So, why am I talking?
My question for either of you, the editors is, how did you choose the articles?
Yeah, I want to know.
Well, I mean, we had the good fortune of working with Lucy Spellman, the founder of Creature Conserve. Susan and I, so I mean, I was basically in charge of the poets as a poet myself. Susan is in charge of the prose writers as a prose writer herself. And Lucy was the one selecting the articles. We kept a close eye on the sort of compilation of who was getting what. We wanted to make sure that a diverse representation of species and all across the country was represented. We didn't want to make, as a poet, I gravitate directly to birds, bird articles, so I wanted to make sure there weren't too many birds, keep the birds out of the hands of the poets. But so yeah, I mean, it was basically Lucy was combing through these open source archives and selecting articles that we thought were the most approachable and generative and inspiring.
Yeah, and I'll just, now that I got the microphone back, we debated, and I would love to hear what you both think about this. Chris and I debated about, and we talked to Lucy, of course, but if we were teaching the workshop that we have used the same process with Lucy live, as a live article, having a science presentation, right, and then kind of chewing it over and looking at different examples, like Elizabeth Bishop, like Ursula Le Guin's cat wings, things like that. Do we instruct these incredible 39 writers that said yes? Do we tell you how to read the article? Because we would do that in a workshop. Read the abstract first, then read the conclusion. If it looks like something you can handle and are interested in, read the whole thing. Lucy picked recent articles, and some of the stuff she said was not readable, even for scientists. So no, not good. And a few of the articles came back, right? But the question was, do we ask you to think about how we think you should read it? And when we teach it, we say, look for those phrases, look for those crazy linguistic, scientific twists that really sound like poetry or science fiction or something that becomes the first line of a novel. And it's all in there because it's words, right? It's language. So it's, when you see charismatic megafauna, it scans, it's like the best phrase in the universe. And so, but we didn't. We decided, actually, Chris, that you were pretty clear about that. Don't ask people. Let them go. Let them. You guys can write, And in fact, Minnesota Press said we don't anticipate having to do a lot of copy editing because the text was so clean. It went through us, and it was already clean, of course, because you're writing, Sophia's writing, Kyoko's writing, Charlie Baxter's writing. I mean, Ramona Ozabel's writing. We're going to get clean copies. So once the book basically took off on its own, and we just kind of ran to keep up with it.
That's very interesting to hear about how you use this in a writing workshop. I'm happy that it was left open. I think there was something definitely, I think in some ways the fewer strictures, the better when you're going to respond. So I think your instinct was probably good. But I also think it would be fascinating to take that class and really interesting. I was surprised when I got the book. So what I imagined the anthology would be, I thought the full scientific articles were going to be in there. And did you? And I was imagining this like doorstopper of a book that would be like full articles. But I think it works really well that it's a selected, it's an excerpt from the article, and then you go into the creative piece. But yeah, I kind of thought it was going to be the whole thing.
Yeah, and those excerpts are, understandable. I mean, because I read the excerpts that, for the articles that other people, got. And but the thing about reading the abstract first, that is exactly what I did. And if I didn't understand the abstract, I was going to return the article. Because if you didn't even understand that, there was no way you were going to understand the methodology and, all of that. So, yeah. I think, though, a lot of the writers are also teachers, who are in this. So I think we kind of learn how to read things. It's just like our whole life is about reading things. So I think we just kind of learn how to navigate, the rhetoric and structure and words and how every kind of writing has its own, it's like bird watching. Are we looking at the birds of prey or are we looking at like little passerines? You kind of categorize. And then you look at the most important thing in bird watching, it's like the beak shape, very important. It's not like, oh yeah, I saw that yellow bird. Like what kind of beak did it have? So I think we learn to categorize.
Hi there. So this cross-fertilization between fiction and non-fiction writing is clearly very productive, right? I'm just curious, like at the beginning of this process, whether there was a clear choice from the start to go into, I guess, what we call physical science works, whereas this kind of these kind of topics, this kind of these animals, these topics and issues also cover in other fields of science, right? Social sciences, economics, anthropology. Were those fields considered as well? Or was it decided that physical sciences would be the most productive starting point? Or nothing at all like that?
Yeah, that's an editor question.
Are you asking about the kinds of responses that would be paired with was that the question?
The starting point was clearly the papers and works in physical sciences, right? Because from what it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether consideration was given to other non-fiction academic works in other fields like economics or other branches of social sciences. Was that considered at all, or was the starting point sciences, like physical sciences?
We stuck with physical sciences because we wanted the articles to speak to those needs that all species have: air, food, water, room to move, shelter, and each other, to speak to those, the ways in which those are under threat and precarious, right? And, but I think you do raise a really good point, because these needs are also, you can also explore those needs through other fields, other disciplines, right? I think about the UN Desgupta review from a couple of years ago, which explored the various ways that economics needs to be applied to conservation and resource management in order to get countries to actually pay attention to the things that we're running out of, right? But I think that would be we didn't go down that route. We could have, based on the complexity of the issues that we're writing about, but perhaps that is something for us to explore in a future book.
I would add that I did I started with the article that I was sent, but then I also did a lot of other research on jaguars. And in the piece that I read, all those references to, the jaguar representing the end of a cosmic cycle. And, I was reading archaeology, I was reading anthropology. So, I think that was probably true for a lot of people, that we maybe started with that one article, but then it's very, it's really an interdisciplinary reading project when you get into really doing the research to produce the piece, at least in my case.
Yeah, and I noticed, because I read all the others in the anthology by now, and many of the essays, address the fact that a lot of the creatures under consideration, their population is divided across the border. Okay, there would be like a population of some animals, some of them are like in the US and others in Mexico. So how do you conserve an animal whose territory, is divided by our territories? And that would be, our territories are not natural to them. So there were a lot of articles that address definitely politics, immigration, economics, so, I think it is an interdisciplinary thing, and it was definitely addressed in many of the pieces.
Thank you. Thank you both. This is a question for both of you, but it was prompted by what you were saying earlier, Mieko, about wanting to have, it would be amazing to have someone send you a scientific article. And what you both expressed of the benefit that you had of reading the scientific articles. I'm curious because I get the impression that the scientists that wrote the articles that you read would likewise benefit from your creative impressions that were developed from their work. In writing, did you have any conversation with the authors of the articles that you wrote?
No, I didn't. I guess I just never thought of that as a possibility. But and I felt that maybe they would want the article to stand for itself and me to get, what I can out of it. Of course, there is this kind of like worry, as a writer who's not a scientist, God, I hope I'm not misreading this. And I hope that the scientist who wrote the article would not think, that I did, like it wasn't as rigorous. I think that is like something that a lot of humanities people fear, that what we do, I know in my heart that it's as rigorous in a different way, but it's harder to prove, in a kind of easy way, that like talking about like walking in the market with my mother and being horrified by the fish is as rigorous as, measuring, how many times the fish actually went up and down the river. And I think that's like the larger conversation that I hope that our country and our culture, would have somehow.
It is worth asking, though, and I don't know if the editors know this, but do these people know that their articles are up in this book? They have no idea. Oh, okay. Moving on.
And that's why you use the open source articles. Yeah.
I keep thinking some scientist's going to come up and do something. I'm not sure what, but probably not.
Yeah.
They're probably not reading it, unfortunately. I don't know.
They might like it.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Once the science is out there, it's available. You can do, it's properly cited. If you wanted to go read all 25 to 30 pages on, habitat suitability, right? You can go find those articles, right? And I think about, well, why are scientists doing these sorts of things to begin with, right? If not to change hearts and minds through the sort of production of knowledge that comes most naturally and is most productive to them, right? We work through sort of cultivating a different kind of knowledge. And that's why we call this collection a polyvocal call to arms, right? We're not like, we don't suppose that we're actually translating a direct translation of the science into a short story or a poem, or that doesn't work that way, right? We're adding a voice to to the science that is already there, that is already bringing attention, is already measuring impacts and implications. And once that information is out there, right, I think it's our job to actually stir hearts and minds so that people will actually, give a crap to invest time and energy in their local communities and try to address the needs that we all share.
Yeah, and I wonder if some of these studies did maybe involve like citizen science volunteers. I know when people study birds, bird banders are citizen scientists. And, like when they were tagging fish, where there were volunteers who helped. And I always think of citizen science as like that middle ground that can bring together ordinary people and maybe humanities people and scientists who have, studied rigorous disciplines. And, my connection with that is that I used to be a volunteer at a wildlife sanctuary. I was a songbird volunteer. And that is how I kind of made my way back into science that, without getting a D anymore. I was a good, bird rehabilitator. I feel like, yeah, I don't have to get a D for this. And, so like, I think there must be a way to connect. And I think people getting involved, as citizen scientists, probably, they can add a lot.
This is going to be our last question.
So this is for both of you. How do you think you grew as writers from this experience, and did you gain anything you'll take into future writing projects?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, everything that you write is a gain of some kind. I think in writing this piece, I would say, because I do write science fiction, I don't know if I would say that what I gained was categorically different from what I've done before, but it was a fresh experience of what I call to myself and I've actually never said this out loud to a person, but here we go. I call it the crush method. And what the crush method is, it's a way of expressing how you kind of take a huge amount of material and you distill it and you smash it down into what is going to be eventually your piece. And so it was, because I did read so widely across a variety of disciplines, it was way more material than I could fit into this 3,000 word essay without making it extremely compressed and dense. And that is a kind of writing that I really love and that I do want to continue to practice, because I feel that there is a richness to the text that comes out of it having been, so many different things that have now been distilled into this one concentrated piece. So that's something that I think it's a way that I would like to continue working for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like doing the shorter piece, because this had to be 3,000 words or fewer. And I think my natural length is more like, 5,000. I mean, I try to keep it under 6,000, and it's always kind of a struggle. That's kind of like my range. And to do a shorter piece, and also using information that someone else provided that I had to kind of paraphrase and explain. And it was liberating, that, I was trying to explain, and this was a part I did not read, in my essay. But the middle part of it is an attempt to clearly explain exactly what the study was, what they did. And it was great to talk about something that other people did and try to be as clear as possible. And so I think it did give me a chance to practice a kind of writing that's different from what I usually do. And that's always a gain.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Kyoko, Sofia, and Chris, for joining us tonight. Let's hear it for our panelists.
Thank you for coming. And thanks for